So informal is actually going to be ones that are not reported to the government. I heard someone say illegal. Quite possibly, okay, illegal. Drug sales is informal, prostitution is informal. Gambling, okay, like offshore gambling, those types of things, okay, definitely informal. But also babysitting for your neighbor and not filling out a 1099, that's informal as well. Rose. The refinery itself would be secondary. The pumping it out of the ground would be primary because you are extracting. Okay, good question. All right, if we talk about countries, okay, and the types of countries, you would find most LDCs where? Primary. In fact, 75%, okay, of an LDC's economic structure is usually made up of primary. Okay, usually that's also because many of those people are using what type of agriculture? Good. Subsistence, which means they're providing it, okay, just for survival. Okay, if we're talking about MDCs, you're going to find MDCs in your tertiary. Okay. MDCs, like for example, in the United States, you have your tertiary jobs, but just, okay, within sort of the tertiary sectors, all of the United States employment, 50% of it, okay, is in consumer services. And then you have to add in the public services, and then you have to add in the business services. So a huge amount. Secondary, I think is kind of interesting. Secondary you would actually find in those countries that are kind of in between MDCs and LDCs. We would call those semi-peripheral. Okay. Yes, Mexico is a good example. China is a good example. India is a good example. Okay, technically they may be considered LDCs because of their HDI, but they're getting much of our manufacturing job because of their cheap labor. What do we call this when you are dividing up? Okay, for example, in the U.S., okay, we still have primary. By the way, what percentage of the U.S. is farming? Yeah, less than 2%. Okay, now of course you have lumber and timber. That's the same thing, sorry. Timber and fishing and okay, bringing oil out of the ground, all of that good stuff. Okay, but then your secondary industry and then your tertiary industry is huge. Your secondary industry is actually going down in the U.S. because of using those semi-peripheral places. What do we call that? Outsourcing, or the international, very good, new international division of labor. Guys, they love using that term. They will use that instead of outsourcing. Okay, so just be prepared to see new international division of labor. I think for some reason it's just kind of an intimidating term. Okay, it's like, oh God, what is that? It sounds like a theory, and it's really not. It's just outsourcing. Okay. All right. Other things that we need to talk about. This is one that is somewhat tricky for people, and I get it. Okay, productivity is going to be looking at how much profit you were able to make. So, for example, productivity is going to be looking at value added. Okay, so you're taking actually the amount to make the product. Okay, and then you're actually comparing that to the amount paid for the product. Okay, you are hoping that your amount paid will exceed the cost that went into it. And again, the costs are going to go into labor. It may also be raw materials, okay, energy. So if you talk about value added, if you have high value added, that means that you have a high amount of productivity. Well, there's a question that they like to ask that says LDCs have low productivity. And then they basically ask you why. And they give you several reasons. Okay, and some of them are like, well, they don't have education. Okay, some of them are like they're not motivated. Okay, what's the right answer? Okay, it may be sold at a cheaper price. They are not creating things using technology. So because of their lack of technology, think about it, the amount of money that is going to go into making things and the amount of labor and energy that's going to go into making things, they're probably making it by hand. Whereas in the United States, we have machines that are doing it, and a lot of times we're pumping out a lot of things. Well, if we're pumping out, say, 100 t-shirts an hour, okay, we can make a lot of profit when we actually talk about our value added. But if they only pump out 10 t-shirts an hour, their productivity is far, far less. So be careful with productivity, okay? Don't kind of get caught in that one. Also, while we're talking about productivity, I want to talk about labor-intensive industries. This is actually from chapter 11, okay? But this is a good time to talk about it. Labor-intensive industries are those industries whose main cost of producing a good is the worker wages, not the pieces going into making the product. So, for example, okay, a labor-intensive industry is textiles. How much are the materials? Really, really, really cheap, okay? Because of that, right, they're sold relatively cheap. So if you can get a t-shirt for $8, okay, at Walmart, okay, then a textile industry, because, okay, they are having these cheap products and it's a cheap price, they're probably going to have to make a ton of them, which means that they're going to have a ton of people, okay, actually producing these goods, which means the majority of their costs are actually going to go to the workers, which means it is going to benefit them more than a non-labor intensive industry to outsource. Think about car manufacturing. Car manufacturing, okay, what costs more, labor or parts? Okay, the parts cost more, which means, okay, is it really, really necessary for them to outsource to a different country for cheaper labor? It's nice, but is it as important as the textile industry? Think about a textile industry, guys. If you sell your shirt for $8 at Walmart, okay, and you're having to pay your workers in the United States $20 an hour, that's rough, okay? You're probably not going to make a whole lot of profit. So these labor-intensive ones are more likely to outsource. Now, are we outsourcing car manufacturing? Yes, absolutely, okay, but that's also because the actual shipping of the final product is pretty low. Why? What form of transportation are we using? Ships, okay? They may be slow, but they're pretty doggone cheap, okay? All right, other things we need to talk about with development. And again, these can all relate into, okay, I don't know, chapter 2 probably, even chapter 3, push and pull factors, okay, that type of stuff as well. Now, we need to talk about the idea of how to develop LDCs. All right. Two things that we need to look at. First of all, we need to pick a strategy as a country. Okay, and then you also need to find funding. Okay, your book is going to talk about two strategies. The first one we're going to talk about is the self-sufficiency. Do you remember this? I hope. India is a good example. Okay. This is also called the even growth. Okay, this is when the country is going to get funding, and we'll talk about where they get it from here in a minute, but they're going to get funding and then they're going to distribute it evenly to everybody. Okay, everyone is going to be expected to either open up, okay, some sort of factory or industry or store, okay, or work in one. Well, the example that I gave you, okay, was the idea of shoe stores. Okay, the shoe stores, if somebody opens up a shoe store here, okay, the self-sufficiency approach sets three things that make sure that the people in your country only buy from you. Okay, those three things are what? High tariffs. Okay, so high tariffs are taxes. Good. A quota, okay, or a limit. Okay, and then licensing. Oof, I butchered that. License. Go with licensing. Sorry. Okay, licensing. Your high taxes and tariffs, okay, this is the idea that if you do export a pair of shoes from the outside, you are not buying shoes from the person that was given money inside your country to make shoes. So, therefore, that money is actually leaving your country. If it leaves the country, you can't help develop, okay? Your quotas, you are only allowed to bring in a certain amount, okay? Therefore, the prices are probably going to go up, therefore discouraging people from buying them, and instead encouraging them to buy from the shoe company that's actually in the country. And then licensing. If you are going to sell shoes from the outside, okay, from an export, importing rather, okay, then you are going to have to pay a huge licensing fee in order to do so, which means you're probably going to pass that cost on to your customer, and your customer is therefore discouraged from buying. So all of these things are meant to discourage, okay, the citizens from buying imports. Okay, the reason for this is that they want all trade and money to stay in the country. Okay, the idea is if you buy shoes, okay, from the shoe factory will get money, they'll pay their employees will make money, and then they'll buy, okay, maybe their clothing at your company. Okay, you don't have a choice. There are no other shoe companies in your region. Okay, the government has basically said, this is the only shoe, okay, maker, this is who you're going to buy from. This is the only clothing maker, this is going to be who you buy from. And the idea is it's kind of smart. It keeps the money circulating inside the country, and it builds up development as it does so. However, there are a couple weaknesses. What are the major weaknesses? What's that? Okay, sort of. Okay, good. So one of the things was, you're on the right track. One is, it's kind of a bureaucratic nightmare. There's a large bureaucracy, which means that anytime you want to make any changes, okay, you must get them approved. Which means hiring and firing, okay, and even like improving your product. So if you remember, okay, if one of your workers is not working, okay, and you want to fire them, you actually have to ask the government for permission to fire them, and the government's going to say no, because if they're not working, they're not making money, and if they're not making money, they're not spending it on a different business inside that country, and so therefore it's stunting development. Well, that's pretty discouraging, because then what happens to your efficiency? Absolutely. Okay, so you're going to have low efficiency. Okay, that low efficiency and actually really poor quality in your products. Okay, that's actually going to encourage your people to buy from the outside. Okay, because again, there's no incentive for improving your product. The government's not going to want you to improve the product because they'd have to give you more money. And let's be honest, if you improve it or if it stays the same, everyone in the country has to buy from you. So why take the extra effort and spend the extra money? However, this oftentimes is going to result in a black market. Okay, black market, of course, smuggling items in, okay, without paying the high taxes, high tariffs, the quotas, okay, the licensing fees, etc. Okay, India is the best example of a country that tried using the self-sufficiency approach. In the years that they tried doing this, they only increased their economic development by 0.1%.